When the Mona Lisa was stolen in 1911, the Parisians went into the Louvre to look at her absence. Minusbolero. In this piece I have not written a single note, and even less. What I have done solely is to erase notes. Ravel's Bolero minus the melody. This was about 1 hour's work, to take the score and to delete all melodic elements. But nonetheless, I haven't worked on any piece as long so far as on this one, 5 years. In the time, I had been listening to the original piece more than 1,000 times, Hörarbeit, listening work, and thought about whether one can do that. There is no role model in music. Such a venture must be tested thoroughly. To compose this piece, to write it, or to be more precise, to rubber it out, it was far more difficult than to write 100,000 notes. Of course, there were people who said that there was no compositional work here. Mr. Kreidler has written off. Here somebody used what other composers have created, which all other composers are doing, even those who write 100,000 notes. Only it will be transparent here. There shouldn't be any fee. There is a vulgar idea of what composition work is. The idea I had to carry around with me for 5 years. With such a thing, you have a long pregnancy. The time had to become ripe. Only after new conceptualism had been discussed in the music discourse for a few years, such a piece could be understood at all. But I certainly did not copy. I know of no other piece of music that would have implemented this concept. Oh, but there is a prominent forerunner. Johann Sebastian Bach opened his well-tempered clavichord cycle with the conceptual piece minus Ave Maria. This concept could theoretically be applied to almost any homophonic tonal piece of music. The Bolero, however, is the best choice because A. It is already a conceptual piece. Ravel said that it does not contain any music. Then my version contains even less. B. In the Bolero, melody and accompaniment are structurally very clearly separated. Only in the end, there are a few interesting music theoretical cases. The trombone glissandi, do they belong to the background or are they felt as a continuation of the last period? What are the chromatically fast-moving mixture chords in the last bar? C. Because the piece is so well known that the knowledge of the melody can be assumed. And D. Because I consider the accompaniment of the Bolero to be very interesting to listen to. On the other hand, Ravel's Bolero is borrowed from the middle section of the second movement from Debussy's Nocturne. He has also edited works by other composers and has sometimes altered the original intentions diametrically. In the famous orchestration of pictures at an exhibition, a pianissimo from Mussorgsky becomes a fortissimo in Ravel's edit. And so the conceptual moment of the Bolero of Ravel, the volume, is conceptualized again to the absolute volume 0. A crescendo of silence always remains silent. Ravel listened to with the ears of Beethoven or of Cage. And at the same time it is the loudest possible Bolero ex nihilo. The absence is God. In Slavoj Žižek's words, less than nothing. In the Minusbolero, the memory plays a great part. The presence of the melody, which is almost inevitably sung inside. In a way, it is the karaoke version or the haunting version with the missing melody as a phantom pain. In psychoacoustics, there is the phenomenon of the residual sounds. If you play an overtone chord and leave the fundamental tone, the brain still forms the fundamental tone due to the given overtone information. Therefore, the low frequencies can be spared during telephone transmission. Thus, one could also understand the effect here. The melody is known, the given accompaniment is the sound of Pavlov's bell. A lag which is there, an imbalance more dissonant than a dissonance. The piece is completely tonal and 3/4 meter. No one would have complained about scratching over the bridge and eighth tones. When I had sent the notes to the orchestra, the first horn player replied, "This is unplayable." Of course, I could answer them totally innocently that there is nothing here but Ravel, which he has already played for sure. So I've caught him. In the case of new music composers, they keep saying that it is not playable. In Ravel's work, at the beginning of each period, only the accompaniment is played for 2 bars before the melody begins. These 2 bars affected my interest. They indicated that there was a second piece, a piece of minimal music hidden underneath the melody. I wanted to hear this music, to raise it as a sort of ready-made to the music of my own. Perhaps that would make this monstrosity of the bolero even more distinct, its latent funeral character. Ravel himself had the rather naive scenic idea to his ballet music that in the background factory workers cheerfully act to the rhythm of modernism. Chaplin's film was not there yet. Any composition act can be understood as filtering. However, in this case, it's extreme in terms of authorship. Every note is original Ravel. The beautiful instrumentation, the characteristic crescendo, the brilliant simplicity, that is all Ravel. And yet we would not hear what we hear at Minusbolero without my intervention, the exposure, and we hear something different but Ravel. The concept, the gesture of appropriation and removal, composing by erasing. The contradiction of the compositional activity, the shift of the perception hereby. According to the previous understanding, it is, of course, hard on the frontier, the claim of the author, for so little paperwork and then with as much physical effort as an orchestral piece. But this extreme, this divergence had to be there. Every concession would have been detrimental to the particular aesthetics, the innovation. And we hear the structure of the orchestra. After Feldman's structures for orchestra, now structures of orchestra. The structure of melody and accompaniment, the hierarchy which is inverted here, the orchestra from the inside, the background is put into the foreground. Much more often than the first flute, we hear the second flute. The accompaniment becomes the melody. Where the first violins are silent, for the most part they are silent here, and this is hardly happening even in new music, they would have the melody. Their silence is a negative. Their boredom is that boredom which normally the third trombonist has to endure. Where voices here pulse, it is not nothing, but something is missing. The minor sign is that of negation. Instead, the accompaniment, which is otherwise under the protection of the known melody, stands free, naked. Orchestra nudism. But instead of the fact that the alienated accompanists were once glad to be heard, they booed me at the premiere. During the 5-year working period, the idea also got a political dimension which was initially unthinkable. The merger of the 2 orchestras of the radio station. At the premiere in Stuttgart in February 2015, it seemed to be obvious to interpret this as a comment. Half of the orchestra, the fired jobs, were made audible. If at all the concept is something of an evil joke, then this unintended increase of meaning. And the joke can be spun further. Since I also have an orchestra commission for Donaueschingen in 2015, the last time with the other SWR orchestra, the other half would be performed in Donaueschingen, only the melody. And when the orchestras then merge, the melody and the accompaniment sound again the original, which is the simultaneous performance of two orchestral pieces of mine. The royalties go to me. Ravel's Bolero will never be heard again completely. It is the Mona Lisa without moustache, or vice versa. It is even a pity in this context that the Bolero is, at least in Germany, now royalty-free. In the USA it is still protected until 2019. It would have been even more piquant if the concept had become the legal question of whether this was legal at all. The orchestra has checked this immediately after the arrival of the sheet music. The copyright for music is primarily a melody protection. Harmonic phrases are much less a matter of creativity. Otherwise, the pop music branch could close up the shop. But everything melodic does not happen in my piece. How nice it would have been to get legal advice from experts. There is a series of classic -1 recordings. These are the orchestral parts of famous solo concertos without the soloists, so that the soloists can practice at home with an orchestra. The Minusbolero also has an aspect of rehearsal situations. We leave out the melody first. It is also this happening situation, which is now made into a work of art through the concert frame, without instructing the musicians to perform any kind of fake rehearsal. By the way, sooner or later, every instrument, with exception of the celesta, must play the accompaniment in Ravel's piece. Hence, the whole orchestra is represented in my version, despite the missing half of the piece. As I just said, with the one exception of the celesta, which falls away. In heaven there is only monophony, not accompaniment. Ravel's Bolero is not upgradable. It is a masterpiece from the first to the last note. One of the best pieces of music that humanity has produced. So shamelessly, I am remixing since years masterpieces I have shunned, since any such quotation is a mortgage, and one can hardly add anything to these pieces. Therefore, in this case, I did not try to add anything, but rather removed something, in order to create something completely different. The only statement on my part would be to play the piece within the usual range of interpretation relatively quickly and almost exaggerate it loudly towards the end to compensate for something missing. Most composers write too many notes. Of course, I also blame myself. I want to hear less and less, because I want to hear more precisely. Reduction is rare in music, and this should be applied concretely at the object. Everything else would be an addition again. Actually, it is quite clear. I want the world to become less.